this one we're trying to edit a pretty epic sunset, so trying to bring out those yellows, trying to bring out those oranges, and adding a pretty strong fade to those shadows and blacks. So if we head over to our Instagram, I'll show you what I mean, and you guys can go give her a follow down in the description. I'll be putting all of your links down there, so if you like her work, definitely go give her a follow. So as you come down, you can see there's a pretty strong fade to those blacks. They are pretty strong blacks, but they've softened up a lot from the fade. And then we're going to be working with this one right here. So as you can see, again, those fades and the blacks, we're going to really bring out those orange tones. And I've actually got the settings for this one. So it was shot on a Fujifilm X-T20 at 55mm, and then ISO 640, so won't be too noisy at all at that level. And then f2.8, so trying to get as much light as possible as the sun is setting, and then a pretty sharp shutter speed of 1/640, so that's plenty fast for a sharp image. So if we keep looking at the rest of her shots, so one unique thing about her shooting style is putting things in the foreground. She very often does that to add a lot of depth to her images. So yeah, we're going to be working with this one right here, and I just want to show you guys her blog. So if you come up here and click here, so as you can see, here's her posts right here. I really enjoyed 5 hotels with the best pools in Bali because I'm thinking of heading over there soon. And I also really enjoyed her YouTube video, so I'll be linking her YouTube down in the description. Really awesome video, and yeah, you guys can go check it out down there in the description. So if we go back to her Instagram, and if we come back down, we're going to be working with this one, guys. Let's get into it. Here's our raw unedited file, and then a screenshot from her Instagram. So let's up the exposure a bit. Let's up the warmth by about 1000. Let's go with that. And so I want to do a lot of work in the curves, and I'll explain that after I've done them. So I'm going to really drop the contrast, and then it will make sense what I'm doing in the curves, because if I don't drop the contrast before I do the curves, it would look way too contrasted, because it will add in contrast and saturation. And yeah, I want to show you guys the process of the curves, but usually they'll just be done with one of my presets. So I want to teach you guys everything, so I'm not going to skip that step. So I'll do the curves now, and then I'll explain what I did in them. Okay, so that's the curves done, and I started with the red, green and blue channels. So what I did is a very simple S-curve in each of them. So midpoint, pretty much right on the intersection, and then just dropping the shadows and bringing it a little more closer to the blacks. And I did this in each of the curves because originally when I was editing this photo before, I really struggled with getting the right contrast in the shadows. So you can obviously see we've got a real fade to those dark places. It's a really strong fade, and if I didn't have the red, green and blue channels, I lacked the amount of contrast. So this curve here is doing the fade, and if I do that, we now have a fade in those blacks. But before I did the curves, I was trying to get the fade by dropping the blacks and shadows. And so if I just reset the red, green and blue, you see how it's just the fade affects so much of the image, and it just doesn't look quite right, does it? Like, so we're lacking contrast. Let's put the contrast back in. We just, that fade is just so big. We want to isolate it in the blacks, kinda. So when I say go back and then if you see the curves come back in, okay, so that's where we were. This is where we are now. And I think that is the sort of fade we're going with back here, because it's hard to explain, but as you saw before, I couldn't get the same fade in the blacks by dropping the blacks and just trying to lift it up here. I had to add in that S-curve. So yeah, moving on, let's drop these highlights. So highlights, very, very common thing I see all the time. Drop the highlights, it brings back so much detail in the brighter areas. So you can see you get all those clouds back. So good idea to do that. As you can see, that's what we've got over in her image. And you can see it's very flat in the highlights and whites as well. Shadows. Wee bit down. Blacks a little. They can actually stay about there. And then whites, get that pop to the really bright areas. Okay, and for this image, a little bit of clarity, make a little bit of a crispness to the image, and that will also slightly affect contrast, so watch out for that. But you can see before and after, you can sort of just spot really smooth images have like a decrease of clarity. Increase your clarity for a bit of a pop and crispness. And then for this image, I'm going to bring up dehaze a bit. So dehaze, I'm not sure what it does, but it sort of does the same thing as bringing down your highlights and will really reveal detail in the brighter areas. So sort of adds in contrast as well, but I feel like it leaves the blacks alone and the whites alone. So I'm just going to do a little bit of that. And you can just get a lot of detail back in the highlights. We don't want too much, we'll just do a little bit. Okay, and we're just adding, missing a lot of colors in this image. That's really up the vibrance and saturation. Let's go with that. So if we really lift vibrance, it's going to really affect those orange and yellow tones, because vibrance sort of affects the mid-tones and brighter colors a bit more. Contrast, leave it about there, and I think we are good. So very first thing to get these colors, so obviously we need sunset tones. At the moment we look quite cold and blue. We've added in some warmth up here, but I just want to do some in split toning. You get a bit more control when you do it down here than adding warmth to the entire image. But what we want to do is, let's go for the highlights first. And I know to do this because if we look at our shadows down here, for example, they're just really, really warm. And then obviously it's very warm throughout the entire image, but the shadows and darker areas, you can see there's a lot of warmth in there. So if we just pick a nice orange, let's chuck a lot of it in the highlights, and then the shadows, do the same pretty much. I'm thinking more of a red or purple almost, rather than orange or yellow. That, and yeah, we get some of those really rich tones in there. While we're here, we might do some grain, so I can see quite a bit of grain in there. Let's come down. Actually, let's do some vignetting, so we can see that we're a lot darker on the sides here. So down here, we need to add this into the image. So let's darken. Let's go with 20. and then midpoint. So I'm gonna bring this further into the middle because I want a really nice soft fall off to the vignette. I don't want it too harsh, so I'm gonna make it start quite early in the image, and then I'm gonna bring the feathering right up so it just fades away quite quickly, or gradually I mean, and then highlights. So I don't want this vignette affecting the highlights, so lift that right up and then you won't get darker bits up in your sky. Roundness, I'm going to bring the roundness right up. Okay, grain, you can see quite a bit of grain. Size a bit up. And roughness about there. Okay, let's keep going. So we're almost there with our exposure, I think. We just need to come in with some filters and stuff. I'll do a bit more on the colors before we do that maybe. So if we go to HSL now, this is where you fine tune your colors. So let's say the hues of the oranges. Let's play around with that. And as you can see, we have quite a few purple tones. We've got way too many greens and blues, so we'll keep an eye on them. Let's go like that. Let's really warm up these yellows to more of an orange. Okay, so you can see that in the grass. Yellows affects greens a lot as well. So you can see we're way warmer over in her image than this one here. Let's really bring that up. You can see that affects the sky back there as well. Okay, these greens can be a lot warmer. You can see we're really green back there. Let's warm them up. Our blues, so they're quite dark at the moment. If we just maybe aquas, let's roll with making these blues so they're almost a purple at the moment. Make them a little more teal. We've got to brighten them later, but I'll do that later with a brush. Aquas, reds. So as you can see at the moment, we're very red. It's kind of a purple. We want more of an orange to our reds. So this way, and then as you can see, the track here gets much more similar to hers. So we want to keep that about there. Okay, let's come down, saturation. Let's drop the saturation of those reds. The greens, I feel like we've got just too much color in those greens. Let's drop them. Okay, so before I do any more, I'm gonna brighten the image with some filters. So you know this is being done because like we're so dark down in this corner here, but then we're quite bright up in the middle here. So we know filters have come in and brightened the image in different areas. So the very first ones I'll do is I've already placed them. So down in this corner, we need to darken this corner. Like there's no way to make this corner as dark as hers without a filter. So we'll start with this one, and what we'll do is just drop the exposure. And then you want to keep, if you're dropping exposure, you got to watch out for contrast. What I'm going to do is to keep our blacks looking not too dark, because when you drop the exposure, you're dropping highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. And I want to keep my blacks kind of soft, and you can see you get that softness to your filter there, and it's not too harsh. So I want to keep it not too harsh by just upping the blacks a bit, and you can still see a bit of that detail down there. So I'll leave it at that. Right, so I've got another one up the top here, and this one I just want to affect the whole sky. You can tell it's quite a bit brighter than the rest of the image. You can see the tops of these trees have been affected, they're not so dark. So what I want to do is just simply up the exposure here. And we'll just keep it as that. Okay, so now I want to brighten our subject in the middle of the image. So if we just do a radial filter, let's grab this one. So just trying to bring our eye into the middle of the image, because we've got this, got our subject here, and then this is a big part of the image is the lighthouse. It kind of acts as a leading line as well down to our subject, and then we've got this dark filter in the corner that it's all making your eye come to the middle of the image. So for this one, smack in the middle, what I'm going to do is just brighten the middle here. Only by a little bit though. I'm going to add a bit of warmth into the middle, as I think we're just lacking those tones right in the middle of the image. And then, what else do we want to do? I'm going to add in a little bit of clarity right to the middle of the image, because just to keep a little bit of sharpness there and focus on the middle. And then to keep it nice and soft, I want to drop the contrast, because as you can see what that does, it just sort of really lightens the photo in a nice way. So just drop it, see what it does, and dropping the contrast in itself brightens the middle there. So that's by dropping the contrast, you're lifting the shadows and blacks and highlights. So yeah, let's keep going, and that just creates, and see it's nice and big, so it creates a really nice gradual effect to the middle of the image. And then inside of that one, I'll do another, and we'll just simply for this one up the exposure a little, and again sort of doing the same effect, just bringing your eye a little more into the middle of the image there. Okay, I think we're looking good. To brushes now, so I've placed a few here. There's an obvious one is this tower here. We need to brighten it a bit, and you can really tell because this tree here is also being brightened a wee bit. So what we want to do is up the exposure, and then let's up the shadows maybe. It's just going to really brighten it. And then highlights, brighten it a bit. And then because you brighten it, it can lose contrast. So you want to make sure that you bring up contrast as well, so it will just darken it a bit to help it look a bit more natural. Right, and then maybe drop the blacks. So as you can see, our tree looks really bright, unnaturally bright kinda, so dropping the blacks will just sort of make it, keep that contrast there so it doesn't look unnatural. Okay, so what we'll do as well, so it looks like it should be brightened a bit more and desaturated, but there's just so many blue tones in that. So if we come back to HSL, what I'll do is really drop the saturation of those blues. So I'm just looking way too strong. And then what we can also do is play with the luminance of those blues. So because this is so bright in her image and the dress, and you can see that's what our blues are affecting, I am going to bring this up a lot. Okay, I think that looks great. And I might just do a bit more of the brush later maybe. A few other things, yellows. So if we play around with this, lift it up and back, you can see it's creating a lot of brightness down here and up here. And you can see in her images, much brighter up here, much brighter over here. So bringing up the luminance of the yellows. Really good idea in a sunset shot. It's going to make everything that light is hitting just glow and create a really nice vibrant look. So I'm definitely going to bring this up a lot. And then luminance of the grass. Want a bit of a shine to that grass also. And yeah, I think that looks great. Right, let's keep going. Let's maybe look at our saturation again. I might take down some of these reds. You can see in the path there that we're quite saturated on the reds. Let's take that down a lot. Aquas. Hardly any aquas. Don't worry about them too much. We'll drop the purples and magentas. There's not many in this image, I don't think, but we'll just bring them down a little in the dress there. But as you can see, we don't have any purples in that. Just drop that down. Right, let's drop greens a bit more. Alright, let's move on. I think we're looking pretty good now. And one other thing that it's very easy to miss. So her image looks slightly different in a way. And what I've been able to see is she's moved the distortion of the image here. So if we just move it a little to the right, you can see if we go too far, you start to see the side of the image, and you don't want that. And otherwise, you've got to crop into the image. You've got to crop these bits of white out. But if you just do it a little bit, we'll go, I think at 8, you can start to see the white bits. So we'll stop at 7. And then if I just go before and after of that, so that doesn't work. So there's before distortion, after this. So it's subtle, but it just makes the image look a little more grand. Looks like you've taken it on a slightly wider lens, and if you don't do too much, it won't look unnatural. So it just adds a little bit to the image, makes it a little more dramatic. So think about using that one for you. Sharpening, we've got a really sharp looking photo, so let's really bring that up. Let's go for about there. Masking can come up also, so I think the edges of everything look really sharp, like the large edges to me look really sharp. So that's what masking does. So you hold Option, you can see exactly where it's sharpening. So this is how you control. If you only want to sharpen the thick edges, you'd lift sharpening very high up. So I'm going to lift it quite far up to about 60. And what else do we want to do? Maybe go back to brushing this image. So if we grab the dress here, so we obviously have to brighten this a lot. And what I'll do is up the exposure. maybe up the highlights. Shadows. So shadows affect it a lot. Whites will create a real pop. And then what I'll do is just drop the black so you keep some contrast in the dark areas. I could have just maybe brought up exposure more, but thought I'd play around with them. So now our subject's looking really bright. And then if we just do another brush, so I've already got placed here, so grab it here. Okay, so I forgot to reset this brush here. So I've actually been editing this photo with this brush already activated on it. So I just forgot to reset that to show you guys. But if I just reset it, so that's before the brush, after the brush, and yeah, you can see all those changes. But yeah, as I said, I forgot to reset it so I could show you guys, but now I can show you now what it looks like before and after. So the purple there is for the skin tones. So if you want to play around with the skin tones, if you look too yellow, you might want to add in some purples there. So you can see there's a bit of purples in the skin there. And then exposure, saturation down a little. And then I think we've got one more brush, this one here. And if you want to see where your brush is affecting, you just press O on your keyboard and that will bring that up. So what I thought was just, it looked like a bit more color in the sky in certain places. So like just the edges of these trees in there, I thought there was, and especially if you look there, it almost looks like contrast has been added also almost. But we'll just bump up the saturation of these areas. Bit more oranges, so that horizon, I think it looks really, really good. And then I've actually got one more filter in this image. If we just get out of this view, go to single view like this, and if I hit radial filter, we've got one over here that I forgot to reset and show you guys. So the edit is already done on it, but if I just reset it, you guys can see what it's doing. So as you can see, we're lacking all this brightness out to the left. So if I just go back to her image, so you can see I got rid of that filter and we're just lacking all this brightness that she has in her image. So if we go back again, here we have it. Back again, let's put all these edits back onto this filter. So what you want to do is just sort of make those whites pop. You want that sun to be shining through. Well, she did in her edit. Let's up the whites there. And then dropping the highlights, what that will do, it will just keep that detail in there, so you can see all the outlines of the clouds in that, which also looks really good. So you can get that brightness with the whites, but then as you can see, if you don't drop the highlights, you sort of lose the nice outlines of those clouds. So dropping the highlights will allow you to keep that detail. And then maybe drop the saturation a bit. And yeah, if we go back, because dropping the highlights can add in a lot of saturation sometime. I think that might look good if we go back and compare it to her image. So yeah, that looks much more similar. And then if we just grab this brush again, so this brush was just adding a bit of saturation in places. A bit of saturation up there. And yeah, I think we're not looking too bad, guys. That filter nicely darkens that corner. And yeah, about done. We could maybe add in some blacks. Probably took too much contrast out of the tower here. A bit more contrast into the trees there. So if we just go to this brush, so this was affecting, if I just press O, you can see where it's affecting. I could maybe drop the blacks a bit more, get a bit more contrast back, maybe up the whites, so you get that tower shining a bit more. And drop the blacks again. Maybe have to drop the saturation to me blue tones. Yeah. Anyway, pretty close there, guys. This is a screenshot off Instagram, so it's hard to get the exact texture and that to look exactly right. But here's a before and after. Before and after. Really nice sunset tones. So if you ever get a sunset, get a nice fade, lift those blacks. To get that nice fade, you need contrast to do it with. And I know it's a little complicated to explain in that, but that's why I did an S curve here. So I get nice dark blacks in these S curves, really nice dark blacks, and then I can make those dark blacks have a fade with this curve. So they're really dark, and then you add a fade in this one, and then you get those dark blacks to look nice and soft. And yeah, if we come back, our exposures look good, our colors look pretty close there. Luminance, the yellows, really making that image pop, and same with the blues, because the blues were affecting that tower there. And yeah, that's about it, guys. Split toning, nice sunset shot, put warmth in the shadows there, and highlights. And yeah, I'll just leave it there, guys. You guys can go give her a follow down in the description. Let her know you found her through these tutorials. Yeah, and if you really like my tutorials, guys, check out the presets. Go check out all the feedback everyone is leaving about them over on the website. See if they're for you. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys. Comment who you guys want to see, so then I can go reach out to them on Instagram, ask them to send a photo.